Welcome back. So we're ready to draw our first object, and what I'd like you to do is work on your larger sheets of paper. If you have a 18 by 24 that's even a little larger than that, that would be fantastic. I think mine is 14 by 17 or something like that. So it's a fairly good size. And realize that because there's distortion, the farther we get from our vanishing point, most of our drawing will look pretty good in this middle, say, half or 60% of the image. As we get closer to the edges, we're going to see a lot of distortion. That's one of the flaws in this system of translating one-dimensional or three-dimensional things onto a two-dimensional surface. So we just have to realize that the further our one-point drawing gets toward the edges, the less correct things are going to appear. So as you're positioning your objects, try to keep it pretty close to that vanishing point if at all possible. I'm going to have you start out by drawing a horizontal line right through the middle of your page, and that is going to represent our eye level. So I'd like you to write that on there. And you can also write the word horizon line on there. I'll be using that term interchangeably. Horizon line. Alright, and then right in the center of your paper, or as close to it as possible, I'd like you to draw a little dot, and I want you to label that CVP for central vanishing point. Now, it would be really handy if you have some tools that help you make sure that your lines stay truly vertical and truly horizontal. So if you happen to have a T-square, that can work really well to help make sure if you slide along the edge of your paper, it'll help you make sure your horizontals are accurate. If you slide it along the top of your paper, you'll be able to draw all your verticals in really nicely. If you don't have a T-square, you can also use a triangle from like a geometry class. And in this case, you can use it along the edge of the page to draw horizontals, slide it along there. You can also run it along your horizon line to draw your verticals, or along the top of the page to get your verticals. The more accurate you can be with your verticals and horizontals, the less frustration you're going to have, and the better your angles are going to align. If you're not real careful and you've got some of your vertical lines that are slightly sloping, or some of your horizontals aren't quite truly horizontal, they're on a little bit of a weird angle, then things aren't going to line up quite right, and you're going to have some distortion getting these one-point perspective drawings to work out. So another tool that can work pretty well is if you have one of these framers square. It also has that 90-degree angle that helps us keep, you'll use one edge as your reference, and then you'll be able to draw the other lines. And to do your horizontal lines, you could, keep this edge against the side of your paper and draw them this way. If you don't have any of those three options, another thing you can do is create a separate sheet that just has a really bold grid drawn on it. This is a 1-inch grid. I traced it all with permanent markers so that I could see it through my paper faintly. It's not real easy to see through, but there's enough of a ghost image that I can use that to help me keep my verticals truly vertical and my horizontals truly horizontal. So try your best to use any of these tools to really help keep your drawing squared up. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so that hopefully you can see some of the details better as we start drawing some of these real specific objects. Alright, most of our drawing probably is going to happen more below the horizon line, and when we run out of space to draw down here, we're going to be flipping our paper over, and I might have you draw some things here too. So anyway, we will make good use out of our space here. So for our first object, we're going to draw a cube that's below our eye level, and I'd like you to shift it off to the side so that we can see the side plane of the box as well as the top of the box. So if you have a mechanical pencil, that works great. HB or a number 2 pencil is what I would recommend. I'd like you to draw the lines dark enough that I can see them in your photograph or scan. Usually working in pencil is a little bit tricky if you're going to be photographing it. So you need a soft enough pencil that your line work is really going to show up well. And let's get started. So you'll need a straight edge. This is a 24-inch straight edge. For one point, you might even get by with a 12-inch straight edge if you don't have a real long one. But as we move into two-point perspective, we're really going to need the length of your longer straight edge. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a steel one, although these are really nice. They've got a non-skid back to them that helps keep them in position as you're tracing. So the first thing we're going to do is construct the face of the object, the part of the, we're going to make these little buildings just to keep things a little bit more interesting. And so we're going to draw a little shed. We'll eventually put a peak roof on the shed. And to start with, what I'd like you to do is just draw a rectangle. So at this point, nothing is moving away from us in space, so we can just use true horizontals and true verticals. You're going to use 2 horizontal lines to do the top and the bottom of the box, 2 vertical lines to draw the sides of the box. And again, let's not make it too large, because the farther we get from our eye level, the more error we will see in the perspective. You'll need an eraser. We'll be doing a lot of changing lines and correcting lines. So once we've drawn the face of the box, we're going to start extending it back towards our horizon line. So what I'd like you to do, from each of these 4 corners, you're going to draw a line and leads to the central vanishing point. You can draw these faintly to start with. We won't necessarily have all these lines show in the final drawing, but to start with, I would like you to actually lightly draw them in, just so that these notes can work as a reminder to you about how you constructed these shapes later, so that if you're doing some other drawings that are based on these exercises, you can replicate the process. So I drew a dotted line here. That's the part of the cube that probably is not going to end up showing much at all unless we make an opening on the front, like this box has. So, all right, so now we need to decide how far back to take this box. If you extend it way back here, that building is going to look like it's about half a mile long. So I would choose a space, maybe, you know, if this is an inch, maybe it's a half an inch further over, and we're going to add another vertical line. So this is the front of the building. We're going to try to construct the back of the building next. So we want to make sure we're using a line that's as truly vertical. I'm looking at my ghost lines underneath here to help me keep that square. And that line can be darkened in. Now wherever that line crosses this vanishing line, we're going to create a point, and that becomes a reference for where we'll be bringing in the back edge of the box. We can also darken in this edge of the box. So from this point, we need to extend a horizontal line straight across, and here it's important not to let that line get crooked. Do your best to try to make sure that the distance between the ruler stays the same on both sides. And again, if we wanted to, we could do something like this from the edge of the page instead. Make sure early stays truly horizontal. So at this point, we see the 3 planes. We also have some information about where that last vertical line needs to be. So where our vanishing line meets that horizontal line that we just drew. This is a vanishing line. I'm just going to darken it in. Where I drew this little arrow, we're going to extend straight down until we hit this vanishing line, and that locates the back left corner of the back of the box. So this is a hidden line, but I do want you to draw it in as if this box is made out of plexiglass. And then if we kept our lines pretty straight, this back corner should also line up pretty well with the one that we've already drawn. So we've got this corner. We're just going to extend a horizontal line straight across to meet with this other one. So this is the very back plane of the box. In real life, we probably wouldn't be able to see it unless the box were hollowed out. And it's really important to darken in the lines that are closer to us, just like we did for our cylinder drawings, and leave the ones that are farther away lighter, so it's clear to the viewer how we're seeing this box. We're going to put an opening in this box now. So I think we're going to cut a big window right in the front of this box. And windows can be any size, so it doesn't have to be centered. But what we're going to do, whenever you cut an opening in a box in 1-point perspective, 2-point perspective, or 3-point perspective, when you're debating which 2 types of line to use, you always look at the 2 kinds of lines you used when you built that plane in the first place. So if we're cutting a hole in this face of the box, we use horizontal lines, we use vertical lines. So when we build the hole, or when we cut that hole, we need to use those same two types of line. So go ahead and add 2 horizontal lines for the top and the bottom of the window, and add 2 vertical lines for the right and the left side of the window. We're actually going to be suggesting that this box has some thickness to it as well. We don't want it to feel like it's just made out of paper. We want it to feel like it's made out of concrete blocks or plywood or something like that. So what we want to do now is show the thickness of the wall that we're cutting through. So what's most important is to locate the corner of the opening that's farthest from our central vanishing point, which would be this corner. This is the one that we're going to be starting to show the thickness. And before you decide how thick you want these two parts, we need to know what this angle is that divides those two planes. So take that point, the farthest from the vanishing point, and figure out that angle. It has to lead to the vanishing point. You're not allowed to do any random angles here. This is one of the biggest mistakes that students make, is they think that this angle always has to be a 45-degree angle, and it rarely is a 45-degree angle. There's only a few situations where it might actually be a perfect 45-degree angle, but it always needs to lead to the vanishing point. So draw that in first before you start drawing in the thickness of the walls. So now at this point we can decide, this is up to you, how thick you want the walls of your box to be. I'm going to make mine, so again this line I'm drawing in now is just a true horizontal line. I've already drawn my vanishing line in, so I've got to add a horizontal line, and then from that point where I just drew the horizontal across, wherever it meets that vanishing line, that's where I'll add in a vertical line. I'm trying to keep that as perfectly straight up and down as I can. I might double check it with this triangle. And if it helps you to see the shape a little bit better, if you want to add a little bit of hatching to kind of separate those two planes or suggest light and shade, that's fine. Now since we can see through this now, we can see into this room, these are no longer hidden lines. These would be visible parts of the wall. So we'll darken those in again as solid lines, because we would be able to see into that room. And again, if shading helps to kind of separate it from the thickness of the wall, you could do that too. But so this rectangle right here is looking into the inside of that room. These two parts are just the thickness of the wall or the windowsill. So it's a little confusing because we've got a lot of lines in there. But this line that was our original dotted line does not need to line up with this line. That's another problem that students always think, or often think, that this line and this line should somehow meet, and they don't have anything to do with each other typically. I'm noticing I'm getting confused because all my line weights are really dark. So I think I'm going to lighten this inside of the room a little bit just so it fades back into the fog a little bit, but it's still a solid line. It's just not as dark as the ones that are defining the opening itself. So the next thing we're going to do on this building is add a peaked roof. And to find the center of the roof, we're going to make the roof head back toward the vanishing point. We need to find the center point. So we're going to do a simple roof like that barn that I showed you, just a simple peaked roof. And to find where that point needs to be, we need to know where the exact middle of this front of this shed is going to be. So the best way to find the middle, you could use your ruler if you wanted to, because this plane is not foreshortened, it's not moving toward the vanishing point. But if you're not sure whether you're allowed to measure or not, the safest thing to do is use the X method. So I'd like you to write that on here somewhere too, so that you're thinking about using the X to find the midpoint. And the magic thing about the X is that it works in 1-point perspective, it works in 2-point perspective, it works in 3-point perspective, it works in multiple point perspective. So if you can remember that when you draw an X through any plane in perspective, the center of that X locates the middle of the form in perspective. So it won't, if you lay your ruler down on there, it won't seem like it's in the middle. But because we're showing that plane moving away from us in space, that X is going to help us show the diminishment of size as things get smaller and smaller as they get farther away. So we're going to be drawing an X on the front plane of the box and the back. So we're kind of imagining, well, this might get too confusing, it's too large for the camera, but so we're going to draw an X on the front plane, and we're going to find the back plane of the shed also. This is the smaller rectangle that's mostly drawn with dotted lines. So we're going to draw an X on this back rectangle, and we're going to draw an X through the middle of this larger rectangle. So it gets a little confusing because they're kind of overlapping each other, but do your best to try to keep the two surfaces separate. So from corner to corner, I'm just lightly, these are just measuring guides, so you don't want to make them too dark. They shouldn't really show up very much in the final drawing. So the center of my X happens to be right here, so you might draw a little dot for yourself there. And then I'm going to draw a second X on the back plane of the box. So that's the smaller rectangle back there. So again, to locate, you know, it's getting kind of overlapped here, but the rectangle that I'm looking at, I'm tracing right now with my pencil. So the center of that rectangle is right here. So I'm going to draw a second dot there to help me keep track of where that is. And then what we want to do is we want to extend the peak of the roof up. Now you can decide if you want the whole peak of the roof to be below your horizon line, which means that the roof is going to slant upward toward our horizon line, our vanishing point, or you could make a super tall roof like you might see in the Northeast where they get lots of snow. And in that case, the roof is going to be angling down towards our vanishing point. So it's up to you. I think I'm going to make mine a little bit higher just to kind of get away from some of this, all this drawing I've got. So from this first front plane of the box, I'm going to trace an imaginary line straight up from the center of that X. And why don't you use a dotted line on this just so I can find your process when I'm looking at your drawing. So dotted line up. You decide how high you want that peak to be. I'm going to make mine super tall and skinny. It'll look a little bit strange, but that's the center of that front box. And then to find the center of the back box, I go straight up. And again, we don't know how high to make it yet, so actually I think I'll hold off on that part to avoid confusion. But what I will do is finish off this triangle. So I'm just connecting the left top corner of that front of the shed to the peak. And then I'll also connect the peak down to this front right corner. I think my dot was a little bit off. I'm gonna lopsided. And then from here, we're gonna run across the top of the roof to the vanishing point. So we don't know where to end the roof yet, but for now we're just gonna kind of head it in the right direction toward the vanishing point. And to finish it off, what we need to do is find the point where the center of the back of the shed is. So we're going to extend up from that point now, and wherever it hits this vanishing line that defines the top of the roof, that's going to help us know exactly where that angle needs to be. So coming straight up, my X happens to be on this line. Yours may not be. Yours might be to the right or the left, and your drawing still might be perfectly correct. Mine happened to end up hidden behind this line, which is unfortunate, but I'm going to go ahead and trace it up from that point, and I'm going to extend that dotted line all the way up until it hits that vanishing line. So this is the center of the back wall of the shed, and now we have this kind of dot to dot thing. We can complete the roof as if we could see through this form. So I'm just connecting up the last side there. And again, I think my ruler wasn't quite on the, I'm going to straighten that up a little bit. It's off here. All right. So we've got kind of a distorted looking, I made the roof really tall. I wanted it to be up above my horizon line so that it would slant downward. If you made a little short roof on yours might be angling up toward the vanishing point instead of down towards it, but that is what we've got. I'm going to zoom in a little bit in case you need to see some of those details. A bit better. Hopefully you can make that all out. Let me get it squared up again. And the other thing I realized I should have done is I should actually tape these two together, because if you shift the one drawing and the background is staying oriented in a different direction, you're going to get some distortion. So taping those together probably is a smart idea. But there's our first shape that we've drawn in one-point perspective, a little shed with a window and a peaked roof. We'll stop there.